Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today it is time for us to review Super Mario 3D All-Stars for the Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by the stupendous Chris Scullion and has been adapted for video by me. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. Well, that all happened rather quickly, didn't it? From the time of recording, it was only a fortnight ago that Nintendo was announcing its long-rumored compilation of 3D Mario games, and now here we are reviewing the ruddy thing already. Some of you will no doubt have already made your mind up about Super Mario 3D All-Stars before even looking at this video, but there are still a few interesting things to discuss, so let's go, as the man himself would put it. Super Mario 3D All-Stars bundles together three of Mario's most iconic three-dimensional adventures, namely Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, and Super Mario Galaxy. All three of these raised the bar for the platforming genre when they were first released, and all three remain immensely playable today, even if the constant slew of imitators over the years means that they don't feel quite as innovative as maybe they used to at the time. The games are presented in a fairly bare-bones manner. There's an extremely brief intro video that you'll completely miss if you sneeze like we did the first time. There's also the option to play the full official soundtrack albums for each game, which is a nice touch. It even lets you turn the screen off so you can pop some headphones in and listen to it on the move like Smash Ultimate did. Remember that? That's pretty much all you get though. Choosing one of the three games boots you straight into its title screen, and from that point on, it's Mario time, baby. Each of the games has been tweaked to some degree, and whilst we aren't talking anything revolutionary like fully remade character models or anything like that, each tweak is still useful for the most part. Given that it's a compilation of three games, it probably makes most sense to talk about each game individually, so let's do that. As the oldest game in the compilation, Super Mario 64 is probably the one whose upgrade is the most impressive. It may have only been upscaled to 720p here for some reason, but the fact that it originally ran at 240p means you're getting a nice clean upscale at 3 times the number of vertical lines. The result is a brilliantly clean looking version of the game, although this new clarity does expose some of the previously well hidden tricks. For example, you sometimes see Mario's head lose a lot of detail as he moves further away from the camera, which would have been disguised on a blurry old CRT telly. Speaking of detail, it isn't just the polygonal elements of the game that have been given the upscale treatment. Nintendo has taken the time to redo all the sprite-based elements as well. All the text is nice and smooth, the counters for the number of lives and stars you have are sharp, and even stuff like falling snow during the winter stages looks much better. This is the first time we've seen Nintendo go to this much effort with a Nintendo 64 game that isn't a complete remake like Star Fox 64 3D and the Zelda games. Even when it was released on the Wii U Virtual Console, which upscaled the resolution a little, all the text and the other sprites were jaggier than a piranha plant's dentures. Even if you were the sort of dodgy type that played it on an emulator, most of the time the sprites would still look rough unless there was some additional post-processing going in, or somebody had done something particularly funky to your particular copy. That is all a thing of the past now, and it really helps to complete that HD feel. It's also worth noting that, as has been speculated, we can confirm that this is absolutely the Shindu edition of Super Mario 64. That might be pronounced Shindao, I don't know. This was a re-release in Japan that basically took the US version and all of its extra voice clips, translated it back to Japanese, added Rumble Pack support, and removed the "So long, King of Bowser" line, which apparently is exactly what he said. Bye-bye! It's essentially the definitive version of the game, and whilst this is something that only the nerdiest of nerds like us would care about, the fact that it's been translated again, this is the first ever English language version of the Shindao version, Rumble included. And in case you need further proof, pressing ZR on the title screen with Mario's face, and the background will be replaced with a cool tiled display showing his face loads more times, and that was only available in that version, so there you go. One final thing to note with Mario 64 is that, as with other games in this package, you can't reassign the buttons. At least in-game. You can still do it on a system level, but that's not always practical. You can hit the minus button to bring up a list of controls, but these can't be changed, so if you're the sort who was hoping to jump with A and attack with B, you're fresh out of luck. It's B and A to jump, and Y and X to attack. For some, this will feel natural anyways, and for others, it will take a little bit of getting used to, but after a few accidental jumps, you'll get there. Scully did. Moving on to Super Mario Sunshine, this time we're looking at a 1080p upscale here. But this time Nintendo has extended the borders of the game to make it widescreen as well, because it was 4:3 before, which Mario 64 still is. This gives the game just a much wider field of view and really makes the game feel a lot more modern than it would have done if it had had those big black borders down the side like Mario 64 does. The text and heads-up display have been given an upgrade as well, meaning everything looks all nice and crisp here as well. The big question around Sunshine's controls was how Nintendo was going to get around the GameCube's analog triggers. The reality is, it never really needed to, since there was never any serious analog shenanigans going on. There was a bit, but it's easy enough to work around. Before, the more you push down the R trigger, the more pressure Mario would use to spray water whilst running, and if you click the trigger all the way down, he would stop and aim more precisely. Because there are so few situations where you'll want to do anything but full pressure, all Nintendo's done is map it so that R means you can move and spray, and ZR makes you stand on the spot and spray. Simple. No doubt some people will mourn the lack of an analog spraying pressure kind of thing, but it really presented us with no problems during our playthrough. Perhaps the biggest change though is that Nintendo has uninverted the cameras, if that makes any sense. Basically in the GameCube version, if you use the C stick to rotate the camera or use the control stick to aim your water spray, you may have struggled because Nintendo inverted the X and Y axis respectively. It was a transitionary time. We were moving on from the old ways into the new ones, but we hadn't quite got there yet. This has now been undone, so unless you're some sort of Sunshine diehard, the new controls will come a lot more naturally to most people. It does mean, however, that anyone who actually prefers using inverted controls, especially with the Y-axis, is now at a disadvantage, because there's no way to change it back to the way it was. And finally, we have Super Mario Galaxy, arguably the best of the three games on offer here. Much like Sunshine, Galaxy gets the full 1080p treatment, and even though it was already in widescreen, the fact that it runs at 60 frames a second and the other two run at 30 means you can immediately notice the step up in quality when you move over to it from the other two games. Galaxy was always going to be the trickiest of the three to port over to the Switch simply because it relied so heavily on the Wii's pointer controls. With these gone, the Switch has to rely on the internal motion sensing capabilities of your controller of choice, be that the Pro Controller or the Joy-Cons. Each has their own strengths and weaknesses. Using a pair of Joy-Con feels a little bit more natural because it's the approach which is most like using a Wii Remote and nunchuck. However, while the Pro Controller takes a little bit longer to get used to, it eventually feels a bit more stable. Whichever interface you use, a lack of sensor bar means that your cursor does occasionally lose track of where it's supposed to be pointing. So the R button has been assigned with the sole purpose of resetting your cursor and putting it right back slap bang in the middle of the screen. It's simple enough, hold your controller straight, hit R, and you're good to go again. It does break the immersion a little bit, but it's the best that can be done given the circumstances, and no doubt it's something you'll just get used to. This does also mean that you can't play the game in docked mode properly with a third-party controller that does not support motion controls. I mean, you might be able to just about muddle through, but there is one other way to move the cursor in Galaxy, and that's by playing the game in handheld mode and using the touch screen. This is a novel way of doing things, and it's certainly the most accurate, but not always very practical at times. When playing with motion controls, you can sweep the cursor across the screen to collect star bits, while still running and jumping and doing all the things you'd like to do. But when you use the touchscreen, you have to take your hands off the button or use your nose, which isn't practical. Incidentally, bear in mind that because of this, if you're playing on a Switch Lite and you don't have another controller handy, you need to use the touchscreen. There's no options to use the motion controls for aiming the cursor in handheld mode without connecting a separate set of Joy-Cons or indeed a Pro Controller. One addition that's certainly more positive though is that Nintendo has taken the action of flicking the Wii Remote and mapped it to the Y button. This means you can perform Mario's spin attack and trigger launch stars by simply pressing the Y button instead of giving yourself carpal tunnel. The motion controls are still there as well if you want a little bit of Wiimote nostalgia, but for those who don't like gesturing to attack, you can rest easy in the knowledge that you no longer have to, and it makes me a very happy boy. So that's all three games. Each one looks better than it ever has on an official Nintendo release, and each has received a few tweaks here and there that by and large enhance the experience. It would be remiss of us though to ignore the fact that we could have had so much more in this package package outside of just the games. We live now in an era where the Sega Ages collection regularly gives us a wide range of options and different versions of each game, sometimes even with new versions that fans have never played before, and the likes of Digital Eclipse are regularly churning out fantastic compilations for things like Street Fighter, Samurai Showdown, Mega Man, and SNK's pre-Neo Geo library, all of which are crammed with behind-the-scenes artwork and interviews. I mean, bloody hell, even the video game Nasty Night Trap got the museum treatment with its remarkable special edition, and I use the word remarkable very loosely. Outside of the soundtracks, which are admittedly welcome, Super Mario 3D All-Stars gives us none of this. There's no concept art, no Iwata-esque style chat with the developers, no digital manuals, you don't even get to apply screen filters or choose a border for Mario 64, which is pretty much the bare minimum these days when it comes to retro remakes of games in 4:3 aspect ratio. And whilst we can appreciate that keeping Mario 64 and Sunshine locked to 30 frames a second means that they're faithful to the originals, it would have been nice to see them boosted to a smoother 60 frames a second, which must surely have been possible for a company as huge as Nintendo. I mean, we can see it in Galaxy. Galaxy's the most advanced game here. Why aren't the other two at 60? In so many ways, it feels like an opportunity was missed here to truly celebrate these incredible games and update them for a new audience. That's the thing, of course, they're still incredible even if they aren't supported with similarly stellar bonus content. If you've never played any of these games before, or you've just not played one, you can easily go ahead and add an extra point to the score we're about to give. These are 3 iconic titles, each special in their own way, and with a total of 482 stars and shines to collect across the 3 games, there's maybe nearly 100 hours of gameplay in here before everything's fully completed, especially if you're going to get those blue coins. We've had an absolute blast playing through these 3 gems all over again, especially now that they look sharper than ever. It's a shame that the presentation is practically bare bones with no bonus content beyond the soundtracks, but there can be no denying the quality of the games on offer here. This is the Beatles' greatest hits of the video game world and is an absolute treat, whether you're reliving it in HD after playing them all before, or discovering them all for the very first time. I truly envy you if you're the latter.